Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more. Uh, the judicial branch, the U.S. Supreme Court. We are continuing along with the associate justices for the Fuller Supreme Court, and today we'll be looking at George Shiras Jr. and Howell E. Jackson. But before we get into the video, I do want to go ahead and remind you all we have two ways to donate to the channel. We have a Patreon account, which is a month-to-month monthly donation system, and I have a Coffee account, which does much the same, but it also allows single one-time payments. If you are in financial trouble or donating will put you in financial trouble, please do not donate. It's tough enough out there with the morons in charge. I'd rather you take care of what you need to take care of, please. If you can afford to donate and you want to donate, thank you. I do appreciate it. It's me, myself, and I that do all this, that does all this. Yeah. I'm the only one, and I don't do commercials for a personal choice, and I haven't made anything of the other chat off any of the websites I post on, and so. But yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and hop back into the video here. Starting off, let's look at George Shiras Jr. on OEA. This is, like I said, from oea.org. He engaged in private practice of law for 40 years before his appointment to the High Court. He had no experience in public office and charted an independent course once he was appointed to the Supreme Court by President Benjamin Harrison. His decade on the court revealed an unadorned and cool style, and his interpretive approach relied heavily on precedent and conventional rules. The major issues from the court included freedom of contract under the 14th Amendment, the reach of national authority under the Commerce Power, and the restraints on individual liberty and property arising from legitimate enlargement of national power. Shiras was a participant in all these areas, but he was not a leader in any one. He came to the defense of individuals who challenged government power, but he did not articulate a compelling jurisprudence for others to follow. He retired at the age of 70 with little notice and died more than 20 years later. So one of the few to actually retire instead of die in office with hardly a ripple of attention. So yeah, born January 26, 1832 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and died August the 2nd, 1924. He is actually from Scotland, or his family was at least. Upper class, wealthy family. But yeah, father was a peach farmer and brewer. Let's go ahead and back over here to the list. Where you at? Shiras Jr. So he was nominated from the state of Pennsylvania, and I think he replaced Bradley, is who it's saying. Joseph P. Bradley. So yeah, George Shiras Jr. And as we saw, apparently he also was nominated by Benjamin Harrison. Stop going up. I don't want you to go up. I'm just trying to see if I can get some information on the president. Served 10 years, 136 days from October 10th, 1892 to February 23rd, 1903. Yeah, Benjamin Harrison. And Shiras Jr. and Jackson are the last two to be nominated by Benjamin Harrison to the court. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump over to Justia.com on Shiras Jr. He joined the U.S. Supreme Court on October the 10th, 1892, replacing Justice Joseph Bradley, which we just mentioned, born January 26 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He initially studied at Ohio University, but eventually transferred to Yale, from which he graduated in 1853. He attended law school at Yale, but did not receive a law degree there. Instead, he returned to Pittsburgh to read law and was admitted to the bar in 1855. He then entered private practice, mostly in Pittsburgh, after a few years in Iowa. He served as a presidential elector in 1888, and on July the 19th, 1892, President Benjamin Harrison nominated Shiras to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Senate confirmed him on July the 26th and took the judicial oath in the fall. So he serves as a presidential elector, meaning he chooses a state's electoral vote. And clearly, he voted for Harrison, who more than likely returned the favor by being like, all right, you can go to the Supreme Court. Shiras spent about a decade on the court, attracting little attention. Some have speculated that his vote was decisive in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company, in a case that superseded the decision less than 20 years later. He also wrote for the court in an early decision involving the rights of resident foreign nationals in the U.S., finding that they were entitled to due process despite their lack of citizenship. So yeah, this idea of due process, it's been something we've known for a long goddamn time. If you are in the U.S., you are entitled to goddamn due process. It does not matter if you are or are not a citizen. This has always been a thing. Shiras retired from the Supreme Court on February 23rd, 1903, and replaced by Justice William Rufus Day. He would die August 2nd, 1924, in Pittsburgh. A major case. Wong Wing versus the U.S., dealing with immigration and national security. All persons within the territory of the U.S. are entitled to the protections of the 5th and 6th Amendments. Foreign nationals cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, like they're doing now. Like I said, the current shitbag that's president, he takes a dump all over our Constitution and nobody bats an eye. Nor may they be held for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. The modern day Republican Party would like to tell you otherwise, but knowledge of the history of the court tells you, no, they're due these rights, period. Now, at the time he was appointed to the Supreme Court, he had 37 years of private practice legally, but had never judged a case. So, interesting. Noted for conservative voting on the majority, with the majority on Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust, and in Plessy v. Ferguson, which we've discussed already, separate but equal, which was a major fuck up by the Supreme Court. But yeah. Practiced law in Dubuque, Iowa from 1855 to 1858 and back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1858 to 1892, becoming a prominent corporate attorney, where he was noted for honesty and pragmatism while representing some of the nation's industrial giants. Because remember, this was part of the Gilded Age. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, all these corporate giants. Recommended for the post on the Supreme Court by his third cousin, Secretary of State James G. Blaine, who would run for president at one point. So, okay, clearly he's got family in the political lines. Sided with the majority 5-4 in Pollock to strike down the income tax of 1894 as unconstitutional, with some historians believing he was the pivotal judge or justice who switched his vote, while other historians suspect it could have been Justice Gray or Justice Brewer. Regardless, the ruling led to the need for constitutional amendment to impose a federal income tax. And in 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified. Voted 7-1 with the majority on Plessy versus Ferguson, which upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation under the idea of separate but equal, which we know, as a fucking fact, was bullshit. You don't trust segregationists to do things right because they're not there to treat certain people with kindness. They don't give a shit. But yeah, George Shiras Jr. Now, next we're looking at Howell E. Jackson, who was nominated from the state of Tennessee. He would be an associate justice, replacing L. Lamar, Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus Lamar, and would be approved February 18th, 1893, serving from 1893 to 1895, dying in office. So he'd only serve 2 years and 157 days. being the last nomination of Benjamin Harrison. Let's take a look at Howell E. Jackson. He grew up in Tennessee and was educated at Western Tennessee College and at the University of Virginia. He studied law for a year at Cumberland University, passed the bar, and entered the practice of law. Though he opposed secession, he served as a receiver of confiscated property in the Confederacy. He ran successfully for the U.S. Senate. His Iowa mate was Benjamin Harrison, and when Harrison became president, he nominated Jackson to the High Court. Jackson was struck with tuberculosis after a year on the bench. Thus, how he got sick. He left the court but did not resign, hoping to recover from his illness. He returned to Washington to participate in the re-argument of the income tax state. We talked about it, the Pollock case. The remaining 8 active justices were equally divided. Jackson voted to uphold the constitutionality of the tax, but was outvoted. And since he voted in favor of the tax, then one of the original proponents of the tax switched positions. Jackson characterized the majority position in strong terms. Voiding the income tax was the most disastrous blow ever struck at the constitutional power of Congress. He would die of tuberculosis 3 months later. And tuberculosis, what you often see, people go and I've got the consumption and coughing into the rags they've got. Excuse me, I've got the consumption. It is tuberculosis. But born April 8th, 1832 in Paris, Tennessee, and died August 8th, 1895. His family was Scottish or of Scotch descent. His family status was middle class, with his father having been a physician. Now, let's look at Justia.com and what they have to say about him. He joined the U.S. Supreme Court on March the 4th, 1893, replacing Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus Lamar. Jackson was born on April 8th, 1832 in Northwest Tennessee and graduated from West Tennessee College in 1850. He attended the University of Virginia for 2 years. University of Virginia, great law college. Great law school in University of Virginia. Top-notch university. Let's just go ahead and admit that now. Jackson then returned to Tennessee and attended Cumberland Law School, graduating in 1856. During the Civil War, he supported the Confederacy and received a presidential pardon in 1866 and resumed practicing law. He narrowly lost an election for a seat in the Tennessee Supreme Court in 1878, but was elected to the Tennessee State Legislature 2 years later. Soon afterward, he was elected to the U.S. Senate and served from 1881 to 1886. So it looks like one full term. He then spent 7 years on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, to which he was appointed by President Grover Cleveland. On February the 2nd, 1893, President Benjamin Harrison nominated Jackson to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Senate confirmed him on February the 18th, and he took the judicial oath on the same day that Cleveland was again sworn into the presidency. He spent just 2 years on the court, beset by poor health for much of that time. His health issues had a curious turn of events involving Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. Remember, it dealt with income tax constitutionality. An 1894 decision that struck down an income tax. The Supreme Court was split 4-4 on the constitutionality of the tax, and that was while Jackson was absent. When the case was reheard, Jackson was a dissenter in the 5-4 decision. This suggested that one of the other justices had changed their minds since the first hearing, although the identity remains a mystery. Jackson's vigorous dissent proved prescient, since the 16th Amendment eventually superseded Pollock and authorized an income tax. And I can guarantee you can hear it probably in your own head how the rich and powerful companies and industrial barons were like, "You have no right to tax us. Bitch, you live here. We have every right to tax you." And then Congress passed a law saying, "Yeah, we can tax the fuck out of you." So yeah, Jackson would die August 8th, 1895 in Nashville, Tennessee, and would be buried there, being replaced by Justice Rufus Wheeler Peckham on the Supreme Court. They have him not listed for any of the important cases, because like I said, he was only there, I don't even know if it was a full 2 years. I know it was 1893 to 1895, but March to August. So he was there technically 2 years, 157 days. So Jackson himself was a Democrat, but was appointed by Benjamin Harrison, who was a Republican, who was elected to help bring about the end of Reconstruction. His rulings demonstrated support for broad federal power, a skepticism of states' rights, and an inclination toward judicial restraint. So remember, like I said, up to this point, the belief of states' rights was often much stronger than a federal strength. Remember, at the start of the country, we had the Articles of Confederation because we did not want a strong centralized government. But there were many who said we need a form of strong centralized government. Eventually, we got rid of the Articles and wrote and brought into play the Constitution, because we needed a form of centralized power for a number of things. And yeah, Jackson clearly believed that there should be quite a level of federal power. Although he had initially opposed secession, he would take a position as a receiver of the sequestered property in the Confederate Civil Service after the Civil War broke out, and later made several unsuccessful attempts to secure a judicial commission in the Confederate Army. So yeah, even though he didn't want Tennessee to leave the Union, he still made it clear he would rather stick with his home state. Like I said, states' rights were quite a thing back then. The trust in the state was often higher than the trust in the federal government. I mean, you probably wouldn't even had a civil war if that weren't true in the first place as part of it. Let's see. So, important cases, the Pollock case about um, income tax, and then Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Yeah. He was against Reconstruction era policies and efforts toward racial equality, even though he didn't want his state to leave the Union. So it wasn't that he was against slavery, he just didn't want Tennessee to leave the Union. And of course, as we've been reading in Southern Horrors and other writings by Ida B. Wells, we see how people of color were often treated. It If you were there at the wrong time, you were often lynched and beaten to death, shot up and hung, and yeah. But Jackson E. Howell, or Howell E. Jackson, sorry. But that's been a look at both of those justices, the last that were appointed by Benjamin Harrison. We'll go ahead and end the episode there. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. And it can't be a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing sources or a bunch of anecdotes thrown together to try to make sources. Like, my teacher knew a jockey who rode his horse on a rainbow over a mountain of gold. No. No, they didn't. Not without some kind of proof. Otherwise, it's just a personal tale, a personal story. Nothing that really proves anything. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.